Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. Not a physical one, but a psychological one. Beneath you, the world is uncertain. People move unpredictably. Plans fall apart. Bodies age. Loved ones leave. And somewhere in your mind, there's a quiet, tremoring scream. What if I'm not in control of any of this? You try to calm it. You make lists. You manage schedules. You anticipate outcomes. You triple-check texts, monitor people's moods, refresh the news, and control what you eat, how you speak, how you're seen. But the cliff never recedes, because deep down you know the truth. You control nothing, not really, and that truth, it terrifies you. So you build illusions. You tell yourself, I've got this. You grip tightly to routines, identities, relationships, and even suffering anything that can create the appearance of stability in a world that is, at its core, beautifully and brutally indifferent to your need for certainty. And yet, you wonder, why does peace always feel just out of reach? Why do you feel safer managing life than living it? Why does the unexpected unravel you, even when nothing truly catastrophic happens? Because control, despite its shiny promises, is not safety. It's a strategy, a defense mechanism, a spiritual shield forged in the fires of fear. Let's go deeper. The need for control doesn't arrive in adulthood. It begins early, when the world first hurt you, neglected you, or simply proved too chaotic for your nervous system to comprehend. A parent's unpredictable anger, a friend's sudden betrayal, a world that punished your vulnerability. In those moments, your psyche made a vow: I will never feel powerless again. And from that moment on, you began crafting a false God control and bowing to it with your every thought. You don't chase success to be happy. You chase it to feel safe. You don't micromanage to be efficient. You do it to stay 2 steps ahead of pain. You don't isolate to rest. You do it to avoid the chaos that people can bring. But here's the paradox. The more you seek control, the more it controls you. You become rigid, anxious, perfectionistic. You overtend. You undertrust. You lose spontaneity, playfulness, presence. You call it being responsible. But often, it's just fear in disguise. Because what you're really afraid of is surrender. And the human mind, it would rather suffer uncertainty than risk joy in chaos. Philosopher Alan Watts once said, the desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing. To hold your breath is to lose your breath. The more tightly you cling to control, the more life slips through your fingers. So what if the real question isn't how do I stay in control, but rather, what am I so afraid will happen if I let go? Would people leave you? Would you fail? Would you finally have to feel the grief you've been burying under productivity and precision? You've spent so long keeping the chaos out that you've forgotten how to let life in. Because life is messy. People are unpredictable. Love is uncontrollable. And truth is never tidy. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. What if the person you've become, the high achiever, the overthinker, the one who always has a plan, is not who you truly are, but who you became to cope with the world's chaos? What if your entire identity is built around managing reality instead of experiencing it? Would you dare to let that version of yourself fall apart? Or has the illusion become too precious? These are not questions for the faint of heart. They are for those ready to stop surviving and start awakening, because underneath the need for control is an ancient fear. And at the heart of that fear is a longing for peace, for presence, for trust, not in outcomes, but in yourself. So, let's go there. Let's unearth the roots of this need to control. Let's meet the child who started it. Let's confront the systems that reward it. Let's explore the damage it causes, and the liberation that lies beyond it, because only when you understand why you cling to control can you begin to release it. The need for control doesn't arise from strength. It arises from wounding. But unlike other wounds, cuts, bruises, burns, this one is invisible. It's not a pain you scream about. It's a tension you normalize. A tightness you carry in your chest, your jaw, your gut. You call it responsibility, maturity, caution. But it's not. It's a scar wrapped around your nervous system that formed the moment life proved it was too dangerous to be spontaneous. Somewhere, long ago, a part of you learned, I must be the one holding the reins, or everything will fall apart. And that belief, it didn't come from nowhere. Picture the child who grew up in a home where the adults were unstable, emotionally volatile, absent, controlling, or indifferent. That child couldn't make the world safer. So instead, they made themselves smaller, quieter, more obedient, or more perfect, or more useful, or more invisible, because when you can't control the environment, you try to control yourself. The child becomes hyper-aware, hyper-responsible, or hyper-independent, not because they want to be, but because someone had to be. And from that day forward, control becomes a language, a religion, a silent prayer whispered in every decision. If I can just do everything right, maybe nothing bad will happen. This is the origin story of countless perfectionists, workaholics, micromanagers, and emotionally avoidant adults. They don't love control. They're terrified of what happens without it. Carl Jung believed that every neurosis is a substitute for legitimate suffering. Control, then, is not a strength, it's a refusal to feel the helplessness we once knew. We think if we can plan enough, prepare enough, anticipate enough, we can finally outrun the powerlessness that shaped us. But here's the tragedy. The very thing we use to avoid suffering, control, is what keeps us suffering. It disconnects us from presence. It isolates us from intimacy. It forces us to live in the future, obsessing over variables we can't predict, all while the present moment withers from neglect. And what about philosophy? Friedrich Nietzsche warned that the more we try to impose order onto the chaos of life, the more we become slaves to the illusion of order. He wrote, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." But most people don't have a why. They only have a how, a structure, a strategy, a method for maintaining control. They've never examined whether the path they're walking leads anywhere meaningful. They just keep walking because movement feels safer than stillness. Control, then, is not just psychological, it's existential. It becomes a shield against meaninglessness. Because what is chaos really? It's not just a messy schedule or unpredictable people. It's the void. It's staring into the terrifying truth that we are not gods, that we are fragile creatures spinning on a rock in an indifferent cosmos, one breath away from death at all times. To combat that terror, we organize. We name things. We define right and wrong. We build ideologies, calendars, belief systems. We try to map what cannot be mapped. This is not inherently wrong. It's human. But when that mapping turns into clinging, when structure turns into a prison, when certainty becomes more important than curiosity, then control has stopped serving you. You have started serving it. And in modern culture, this problem is multiplied. We are sold control everywhere. Fitness apps track our steps. Algorithms tailor our news. Metrics quantify our productivity. Filters polish our faces. Calendars dictate our worth. We no longer live, we optimize. And in doing so, we lose the very thing that makes life bearable: mystery. Mystery is not chaos. It is the sacred unknown. It is the space in which wonder, growth, intimacy, and beauty emerge. But control doesn't allow mystery. It fears it. It wants answers, not questions. It wants mastery, not vulnerability. And so, we choose control again and again, not because we're strong, but because we're afraid. Afraid of being hurt, afraid of being seen, afraid of letting go and discovering we have no idea who we are underneath all our planning and precision. But here's the truth. No one wants to face. Control doesn't stop chaos. It only stops you from adapting to it. It doesn't protect you from life. It separates you from it, and when you live too long inside that separation, you begin to forget what aliveness even feels like. You start confusing numbness with peace, productivity with worth, compliance with safety. You say, "This is just who I am," but maybe it's who you became when you stopped feeling safe enough to be anything else. So what now? What happens when you finally see control for what it is? Not a character trait, not a virtue, but a trauma-informed strategy. One that once kept you alive, but now keeps you small. Can you live without it? Should you? Or is there another way? That's where we go next. You wake up every day with a plan? Even your rest is structured. Even your spontaneity is scheduled. You convince yourself this is balance, that this is adulthood, maturity, wisdom. But beneath the structure, there's a quiet exhaustion, a tension in the body that never quite softens, a dull ache in the soul that no amount of control ever truly soothes. Because here's what no one tells you. Control is a full-time job. It demands constant vigilance, hyper-awareness, emotional self-editing, a near-religious devotion to anticipating what might go wrong and neutralizing it before it ever does. And the longer you live like this, the more it begins to shape you. Not just your choices, but your personality, your worldview, your relationships. Let's look at how. First, the body. Your nervous system is built to regulate itself between states of activation and rest, fight, flight, freeze, and calm. But chronic control hijacks this cycle. It keeps you locked in a low-grade fight or flight mode. Even in safe environments. You sit at dinner with friends, but your shoulders never fully drop. You lie in bed at night, but your thoughts sprint like prey. You take vacations, but never truly arrive. Control has rewired your nervous system into one that expects threat not because it's there, but because it once was. And your body, it doesn't know time. It only knows patterns. Then comes the emotional cost. When you need to control everything, you begin to distrust your emotions. Joy feels irresponsible. Sadness feels dangerous. Anger feels like a loss of control, so you suppress, you manage. You intellectualize instead of feeling. You become a master of logic, but a stranger to your own heart. And over time, this disconnection grows. You begin to feel flat, numb, unmoved. Not because you don't care, but because the price of always being in control is the loss of emotional fluency. You don't feel safe feeling anymore. Now, your relationships. Control doesn't just affect how you handle yourself, it bleeds into how you handle others. You might struggle to delegate. You monitor people's moods like seismic sensors, afraid they'll erupt. You withhold vulnerability, fearing that if someone really knew you, they might leave or worse, disappoint you. So you preempt, you control the narrative. You stay one emotional step ahead at all times. But what does that create? Surface-level intimacy. Conditional connection. Love that feels more like management than surrender. You attract people who mistake your composure for combat. Inside, you're starving to be held, seen, understood. And yet, the moment someone tries to get close, you pull away, because, to let them in would mean letting go. And letting go feels like death. There's also the existential cost. Control steals wonder, mystery, discovery. You stop being surprised by life. You stop exploring. You stop saying yes to things you don't fully understand. You become imprisoned in a world of predictability when you designed one you trust, but one that also bores you to your core. There's no poetry in a life that's fully controlled. Only repetition, safety, structure. And if you're honest with yourself, it doesn't feel like safety anymore. It feels like stagnation. You keep trying to optimize your life, but it never quite satisfies. It never feels like enough. That's not a flaw in you. That's a flaw in that strategy, because life doesn't respond to control. It responds to aliveness. And here's the scariest part of all. The need for control keeps you from ever truly knowing yourself. when you're always managing your reactions, your emotions, your responses. You don't know what's real and what's rehearsed. You're not sure if your decisions come from intuition or avoidance. You don't know if you want something or just believe you should. You live in a simulation of yourself, and when someone asks you what you really want, what brings you joy, what sets your soul on fire, you don't have an answer, because joy is unpredictable. It's messy, it's wild, and you've been taming your wildness for so long, you've forgotten what it sounds like. So what happens over time? Your life becomes a ritual of avoidance. You seek control not to build something but to avoid collapse. Not to live, but to defend against life. This is what trauma does when left unmeaned. It doesn't just wound you, it reconstructs you, and one day you wake up and realize you've been controlling everything, except for the one thing that matters. Whether this is the life you want, and now the consequences are clear. Control keeps you safe, but small, precise but disconnected, protected but painfully alone. You are functioning, but you are not free. And if you're not free, who are you? That is the question that leads us into the next chapter. Not one of strategies or hacks, but one of rebellion. Because if control is the cage, then surrender is the door. There is a moment in every tightly wounded life when something cracks. Not in chaos but in silence. You cancel plans you would have once powered through. You stop mid-sentence and realize you don't believe your own words. You look around your meticulously curated life and wonder, why does none of this feel like mine? That's the beginning. The rebellion doesn't start with rage. It starts with the quiet horror of self-recognition. You see the mask, and for the first time, you realize it's never coming off on its own. So how do you begin to break free? Not by fixing, not by letting go all at once. You begin with the truth. You are exhausted from trying to keep it all together, and that exhaustion is not failure. It is feedback. It's your body, your soul, your inner child, begging you to stop pretending that control equals peace. Because it doesn't. Control mimics safety, but it is not luminous. And the real rebellion, the real freedom starts when you choose aliveness over perfection. Let's talk about what that looks like. It begins with experiments in surrender, not recklessness, not chaos, but trust in the unknown. You say, I don't know. Instead of offering a polished opinion, you leave the email draft unfinished and go for a walk. You let someone else drive literally and metaphorically. You cry when the tears come, even if you don't understand why. You stop correcting, managing, predicting, for just a moment longer than feels comfortable. These aren't small acts. They are sacred ruptures. Each one sends a message to your nervous system. We are not in danger. We don't have to grip so tightly anymore. And slowly, you begin to realize, control didn't protect you from the world. It protected you from feeling the world. Now, you are choosing to feel again, and with that, comes the return of trust. Trust is the soul's antidote to control. Not blind trust in others, but radical trust in yourself. Trust that you can survive discomfort. Trust that you can respond to chaos without collapsing. Trust that you do not need to be in control to be okay. This kind of trust doesn't come from affirmations. It comes from practice. You learn it by taking small risks. Say the vulnerable thing. Pause the plan. Let someone show up for you even if they might fail. Leave a little space between thought and action. And when nothing terrible happens, when you don't shatter, you begin to believe. Maybe I don't need to control everything. That belief, that's your first taste of freedom. But beware. This rebellion has enemies. They'll whisper, you're being lazy. You're letting people down. You'll lose everything if you don't stay on top of it. That voice isn't your intuition. It's your trauma. It's your past trying to keep you safe. The only way it knows how, by shrinking your present to fit the fears of your past. But you are not your past. And you are not here to shrink. You're here to reclaim. Reclaim your spontaneity, your intuition, your presence, even especially your joy. Joy is uncontrollable. That's why you've pushed it away for so long. You couldn't measure it, schedule it, predict its ending, but you've mistaken fragility for danger. Just because something ends doesn't mean it's not worth having. Just because something's uncertain doesn't mean it's unsafe. The rebellion is remembering that joy isn't reckless, it's revolutionary, especially when you've built a life around control. So let yourself laugh mid-breakdown, dance mid-disaster, fall in love with something imperfect and unplanned, because the opposite of control isn't failure, it's flow, and flow doesn't come from effort. It comes from allowing. You don't heal by force, you heal by softening. Softening into stillness, softening into truth, softening into who you were before the world demanded you perform. Think of the child you once were, the one who explored without plans, who cried without shame, who trusted their own feelings, not to be perfect but to be real. That child is not gone, just buried under the armor of adulthood. The rebellion is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before you thought you had to be someone else. And yes, it's scary. Freedom always is. There will be days when you miss your cage, when you crave the checklist, the certainty, the old patterns that numbed you just enough to get by. But getting by is no longer enough. Now, you are choosing to be, fully, messily, beautifully, not because it's easy, but because it's true. And in a world addicted to control, choosing truth is the boldest rebellion there is. You've stopped clinging. Now, you're ready to remember. What comes next is not a strategy. It's a realization, a single, powerful truth that changes everything. Imagine standing in the center of your life, no longer trying to steer it, no longer gripping it by the throat, no longer fighting to control every heartbeat, every outcome, every interaction, just standing, breathing, feeling the wind move through you, instead of bracing against it, and then it hits you, like a memory you never knew you had. You were never meant to control life, you were meant to dance with it. The final truth is this: control is not power, presence is. Let that sink in. All your life, you've equated control with power. If I can manage everything, then I'm safe. If I can avoid uncertainty, then I'll be okay. If I can master myself, others, and the world around me, then I'll finally rest. But rest never comes. Only repetition, because control is based on fear. Fear of loss, of pain, of chaos, of not being enough. So it demands tension. It requires hypervigilance. It insists you earn your safety. But presence? Presence is rooted in trust. It doesn't say, I am in control. It says, I can handle whatever comes. That difference changes everything, you see. Control separates you from life. Presence immerses you in it. Control is a dam. Presence is a river. Control keeps you armored. Presence keeps you open. Control says, I must make this happen. Presence says, I will respond to what happens. The more you drop into presence, the more you realize, you don't need to control the waves. You just need to learn how to surf, and the moment you stop resisting life, life starts to meet you in ways you never imagined. There is a silence that follows surrender, not the silence of giving up but of finally listening to your body, to your intuition, to the quiet hum of wisdom that lives beneath your fear. And when you listen closely, you hear what's been there all along. You are not here to win life. You are here to experience it. The beauty, the terror, the wild, raw, unbearable tenderness of being human. And when you stop demanding control, you start discovering grace, not the religious kind, but the kind that says, you are held, even when you're falling. You are safe, even in uncertainty. You are enough, even when everything else is out of place. Viktor Frankl once said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space, That's where presence lives. That's where the illusion of control falls away, and the truth emerges. You are not here to perfect life. You are here to participate in it, to dance, stumble, weep, laugh, and feel without needing every step to be choreographed. And now, you see the full arc. You began by gripping everything, believing it was strength. You unraveled, realizing it was fear. You rebelled, choosing truth over perfection. And now you return to yourself, not as a project, not as a strategy, but as a being, a breathing, weeping, wildly alive being who has finally remembered that control was never the goal. The goal is connection to your body, to your emotions, to the present moment, to others, to life. Connection doesn't require control. It requires presence. It requires surrender, not as a loss, but as a return to what you knew before the world taught you fear, that you are already enough, that life is already unfolding. That peace is not something you find in plans, but in permission. Permission to be here, as you are, right now, without managing, without predicting, without fixing, just here, just alive, just free, and perhaps the greatest irony of all, the moment you stop trying to control life, is the moment you finally feel in control, not of outcomes, but of yourself, not of others, but of your own responses, not of the future, but of your ability to meet it, fully awake. This is the kind of control that liberates instead of cages, not dominance, but agency, not manipulation, but trust, not armor, but alignment. So what do you do now? You live, you risk, you surrender, you let things unfold without forcing them to fit your expectations. You stop asking life to be predictable and start asking yourself to be present. You'll still make plans, you'll still set goals, you'll still try, but you won't cling. And in that letting go, you'll gain something far greater, peace that doesn't depend on anything going right, because now, you're not afraid of it going wrong. You know who you are, not the version of you that manages, but the version of you that lives, and that version, that's the one who's always been waiting. Beneath all the strategies, all the perfectionism, all the tight fists to simply exhale, let go, breathe, return. You are not in control. You never were, but you are free, and in the end, that was what you were really chasing all along.